Hi everyone, this is Mr. Warren giving you a brief lecture on the epic literature terminology to know, understand, and apply. The slides that go in this PowerPoint coordinate with your ninth grade language arts epic literary terms graphic organizer. So I'll be talking about the terms as the description definition comes up. Hopefully from what I'm saying you'll be able to gather some examples. You're responsible for coming up with a symbol or logo that represents the word on your own. If at any point I continue on to the next slide and you weren't finished getting the information on that slide, just go back in the video, pause, write down what you need to, and then listen through next time. Alright, so moving on. Number one, an epic. Epic is a poem that's a long narrative about a serious subject. If you think about the Odyssey, if you look at the pages, every single page you looked at, there was a lot of extra blank space on the right. That's because it's actually a poem. It's written in verse. It's also a narrative. It tells a story. And in particular, if you think of the Odyssey, it's talking about Odysseus and his journey home. Focuses on the exploits of a hero or demigod who represents the cultural values of a race, nation, or religious group. Like Odysseus in the Odyssey, or like Achilles in the Iliad. The hero's success or failure will determine the fate of that people or nation. So if you think about the Odyssey, with Odysseus, the people that he affects are one, his crew, and two, his family. And so in the Odyssey, a lot of the times the actual failures of Odysseus are what lead to his men actually dying. So if you think about Odysseus' encounter with the Cyclops and the fact that he was curious to go there because of his choices, because of his ideas, some of his men died. And then you also have his success, which ended up saving some of the men later when he comes up with his ploy to escape. It has usually an epic also has a vast setting that covers a wide geographic area. So if you think about the Odyssey and Odysseus' journey home, think of all the different places he goes in and around Greece. First he starts off in Troy, leaving Troy from the Trojan War. And then he goes and raids the beaches of the Cicones. Then he goes to the land of the Lotus Eaters. Then he goes to an island next to Cyclops Island. Then he actually goes to the Cyclops Island because he's curious. Then after that he ends up on the Aeolian Island where Aeolus, the god of the winds, lives. Then after that he ends up at Laestrygian land, the Laestrygian land of the giants. Then after that Circe's island, Aea. Then the kingdom of the dead. Then back to Aea, back to Circe. And he goes past the Sirens, the Scylla, the Charybdis, ends up on the island of the sun, or Lord Helios Island. Then finally Calypso's island, Phaeacia. And after speaking with the Phaeacians, telling his story, they give him a boat and he heads home back to Ithaca. So 15 different places all around the Mediterranean, all around Greece. If you were to take a map and look at the Mediterranean, you would see pretty much Odysseus goes everywhere. It's almost like the equivalent of someone traveling up and down the east coast of the United States and going back and forth around it. Epics contain superhuman feats of strength or military prowess, and the gods or supernatural beings frequently take part in the action. So if you think about the Odyssey again, we have Odysseus, our main character, our protagonist, our epic hero. And while he's not necessarily stronger than everyone else, physically, he is stronger mentally. And has military prowess. He's the one who has the specific war strategies that help save men. And then you also have the gods and supernatural beings. You have Athena, who consistently helps Odysseus. You have Hermes. You have Zeus. You have Poseidon. You have Polyphemus, the Cyclops. You have the Scylla, the Charybdis, Calypso. All of these supernatural beings who are integral parts of the Odyssey. The poem begins with the invocation of a muse to inspire the poet. If you look at the first 15 lines of the Odyssey, you'll notice that it's literally the poet calling out to the muse, calling out to the god that inspires poetry, saying, "Sing to me, muse, and through me tell the story of the man of twists and turns." And so the reason for that, if you think back to when the Odyssey or the Iliad, these epics were originally created, they were part of an oral tradition in Greece, right? They didn't even have an alphabet. They didn't have a written language yet. And so these stories, these epics, were passed down through bards, through poets who would go around and tell these epics. And so the Iliad is roughly 15,000 lines long, the Odyssey nearly 12,000 lines long. Just to read out loud for me would take 24 hours straight. So, you know, if you're imagining a storyteller doing this and they're adding different things, people have got to stop, come, maybe you do it over a series of nights, it would take 3, 4, 5 days to tell the story of the Odyssey. And so that seems like something that is superhuman, supernatural. And so the invocation is the bard calling out to the gods saying, "Help me do this thing that is, at the time, so unnatural." Even now it's unnatural to be able to know that much. But in a culture where most people couldn't even read or write, it seems incredibly special. The narrative begins in medias res, meaning literally in the middle. If you think of the actual narrative story of the Odyssey, we first hear about Odysseus when he is on Calypso's island. And so he's with her, all of his men are dead. We have Zeus sending Hermes down because of Athena to tell Calypso it's time to finally let Odysseus go home. And so she lets him go. He struggles on the ocean due to Poseidon. He eventually winds up at the Phaeacians. And there, after competing in some Olympics and some contests, some different song and dance sort of things, they eventually ask him, "Who are you?" And he says, "Well, I'll tell you my story." And so then the storyline actually loops back around all the way to Troy and goes back to the beginning. And he says, right after Troy, first we went to the beaches of the Cicones, then to the Lotus Eaters, and then. And so the story puts itself back together until finally he says, "And then I reached Calypso's island." And I won't tell that part again. And so after that, after the Phaeacians have heard, they give him a boat. He heads back home to Ithaca, and there he meets the suitors. So the whole story starts in the middle, loops back, and then fills in the gaps. The epic contains long catalogs of heroes or important characters focusing on highborn kings and great warriors rather than peasants and commoners. So in the Odyssey and in the Iliad, most of the major people who you hear their names are actually kings. You don't really hear anything about the peasants, the commoners. And actually in the Odyssey, when Odysseus goes to the kingdom of the dead, he essentially name drops every important person in Greek history, as well as from the Iliad. So when he goes back, he runs into Achilles, he runs into Tiresias, he name drops a lot of other people, all highborn kings and great warriors.